Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's SME Club event. For those of you who I've not met before, I'm Jen Quinn, Growth Manager at Virgin Money Manchester, and we are delighted to be sponsors of today's event. I've got a really special offer to share with you all today, as we've just launched our personal current account bundle offer for new customers to Virgin Money. Along with all of the great benefits the account already offers, as a thank you from us, you'll also receive a free luxury 15-bottle case of Virgin wines just in time for Christmas, plus a saving of up to £225 across selected 18-month Virgin Media packages. We'll share that link with you after today's event, but please do get in touch if you have any questions. We'd love to hear how you found today's event, so please do tag us in your social media posts. That's at Virgin Money on all social platforms. And finally, today our panel will be discussing why inclusive design is a big deal. So for now, I'll hand over to Ian Pocock and look forward to catching up with you at our next event. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all today to our webinar on inclusive design. I'm Ian Pocock. I'm the MD of Research and Service Design at Engine Transformation, part of the Engine group. I'm also delighted to welcome my fellow presenters today, my colleagues here at Engine Transformation, Dave Jackson, David Singer and Natalie Harney, and my deepest thanks to Julie McCallan, the Service Manager at HMCTS Tribunal Service, who has kindly given up her time today to talk through the Immigration and Asylum Tribunal Service, which she has been responsible for delivering. It's an amazing example, it really is, of inclusive design in action. First, a quick introduction to Engine for those who may be joining us for the first time or coming into contact with Engine for the first time. We're proud to describe ourselves as a future company, a truly end-to-end creative design, technology and communications company, and that includes work for the likes of writing the Martha Lane Fox report, which is 10 years old this year, developing Couch 5K and How Are You and Sugar Smart for Public Health England. We designed GamStop, the world's first real-time self-exclusion platform for problem gambling. And we're also the company behind recruitment advertising for the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, as well as this year's Warburton's ad featuring Robert De Niro's star turn early in the year, which got much talked about. So really, we're very much an end-to-end creative and technology business. So coming up today, I'll shortly be handing over to Dave Jackson to talk through all things assisted digital, followed by Julie, David and Natalie to take us through the immigration and tribunals. And at the end, we should have a reasonable amount of time for questions that you may have, and we very much look forward to answering those. But first, what do we mean by inclusive design? There's a lot of language around this topic: accessibility, universal design, assisted digital, circular design. And in our view, inclusive design is all about bringing these things together. While individually, each component may focus on the outcome, inclusive design is really about the process. Next slide, please, David. We have to think through every design decision that has the potential to exclude a customer or exclude a user. So in our design process, we very much put the emphasis on understanding the lived experiences of people we are designing for their context, the environments, the communities, the economic factors, all of those elements that influence the capability or the opportunity and the motivation to engage with a product or a service. So that what we're able to really do is to capture those lived experiences of those users within our design process, and that then leads us to an outcome which is, in our view, much more inclusive than it otherwise would be, and that's where you get to a truly human-centered design outcome. Just to leave you this introduction for a brief thought, in 2006, the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, or CABE, came up with a set of principles which I think works really well for all types of design. And firstly, that's to be inclusive. Everyone should be able to use the service safely and easily. We should be able to respond to what people say they need and what they want. Services need to be flexible so that different people can use them in different ways, and they need to be convenient. And you'll hear a lot about this today in terms of reducing effort or separation between different types of services. And they need to be accommodating. So we need to think about the age, gender, mobility, ethnicity, and different other circumstances, language, for example, that needs to come into it. And we need to be welcoming within how we design our services, not having barriers that might exclude some people. And I think the last point is really important, which is how we need to be realistic. One solution doesn't always fit all, but how can we still get that product or that service to a user or a customer in a way that still allows them to make the most of it? So that's it from me for now. I will hand over to Dave Jackson to take you through our thinking and our approach and how you might want to think about assisted digital. Dave, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you, Ian. So hi everybody. So as Ian said, I'm Dave Jackson. I'm an associate director at Engine Transformation. I've been working in digital for about 20 years, the last 15 pretty much in government. And that has really exposed me to a term which government created called assisted digital. These are people that struggle to be online. And generally, we find that businesses aren't thinking about these sorts of users enough. So I want to talk a little bit more about that today. So when we build a digital service, really our objective should be to make sure that everyone who needs to use it can actually use it. And GDS define assisted digital really as being people that need support because they perhaps lack trust in your service or the internet. They may not have confidence to be online or even access to the internet. They may have poor or next to no digital skills, and their motivation to overcome these challenges actually isn't really there. And you may be thinking, well, actually, is this really a big deal? Is this something which really matters? We're talking small numbers of users, are we not? Well, actually, we're not. They're pretty big groups. When we look at the fact that 18% of the population are over 65, 10% of the population have dyslexia, and 1 in 6 of the population have the reading age of an 11-year-old, these numbers are pretty huge, not insignificant at all. So through a lot of the work that we have done, we've really been able to categorise the more extreme end of assisted digital use into 3 groups. I'll just touch on these very briefly. There's avoid it at all costs, mobile only, and capable but not willing. Now what we find here is, particularly with avoid it at all costs, that they may have digital devices, but they generally don't use them to do things online. And we often find there's often some sort of challenge. They might have a very low reading age, they might suffer with a condition such as dyslexia, they might find simple mathematics difficult. And one thing we've observed in the testing and the work that we've done with them is they're often quite concerned they'll get things wrong or be judged or thought of as stupid, and this really leads them to disengage. We then find there are groups such as mobile only. And here, these people may own a computer, but they generally don't use it. And if they do struggle. But they have a smartphone. Now, they're by no means savvy in the use, or rather what we say is typically savvy with a smartphone. They might use Siri for web searches. They may watch videos. They may use social media. These are common things, but it's more so about consuming rather than creating. And then we find there's the group that we call capable but not willing. These people, if pressed, can do things online, but generally they try to avoid it. They would much rather find another means. That might be face-to-face, it might be over the phone. And we've also found there's a lot of people in this group where English isn't their first language. And while conversational English might be fine, when it comes down to something technical or something of high importance, which, I don't know, that might be home insurance or it might be completing a tax return, they have less confidence in that more formal English. So GDS, Government Digital Service, have a scale, which I'm just illustrating here, which shows how assisted digital works from the never have, never will, through to what they call cyborg, people that clearly are at one with technology. And we've just plotted here these types of users and where they sit across these groups. And we've crudely plotted in terms of how numbers increase as you progress through the scale. So there's lots of people that have different categories that sit on the assisted digital area, and it isn't just the extreme users, people that might struggle just to use a computer or get access to the internet. It could be users that might struggle with certain tasks, which may be uploading a document, for example. They may be online, but they might struggle with certain activities. Now, one thing which we have noticed is that lots of users that have difficulty online have a neurodiverse condition, and there are many of these. some of these are, and some of the common ones we experience are dyslexia, dyscalculia, which is the difficulty with numbers, dyspraxia, which is with motor coordination and social emotional difficulties, ADHD and autism. And once again, these are not small numbers. In the UK, these are the number of adults we're looking at who are diagnosed with these conditions. But if anything, these numbers are quite low. The World Dyslexia Association believes that actually it's more like double that number. Because, of course, there are many people that are undiagnosed. And if we look at the older population today, well, when they went through school, the education system didn't recognise these things because perhaps they didn't even exist as a known condition. And if we look at people who are middle-aged now, the education system wasn't as good then as it is now at identifying these challenges. So I think the key point here is we have quite a significant challenge. Now, there's quite a long story behind all of these, which we're not going to go into today, but it's useful to understand. But what I thought would be useful is to show you this. This is a website that was created by a chap called Victor Wild, and he based upon a friend of his who has dyslexia, describing to him how she found reading online, or reading in general. Now, I'm just going to run this. I've just got a short video of it. I'd like each of you, if you can see the screen clearly enough, to try to read the words on the page. Now, this is a fairly extreme version of dyslexia that's showing, of course, dyslexia is different across different people that have it. And if you try, it does make sense, but it takes so much effort. And if anything, it's really exhausting. And I think we should ask ourselves, if we were experiencing this when we were reading online or even anywhere, we would want to design web pages and the content that sits on them quite differently, make it far easier. I also think it's really important that we touch on the elderly, because when we look at the traits I've just shown you, these are conditions that you're born with. It's the way that your brain works. But as we age, we are all going to experience challenges in these areas. Now, sadly, this is quite a long list, but we will all start to have problems in this space. Once again, there's quite a long story behind each of these points, which we're not going to go into, but we do need to be very mindful of the impact this has. And research shows that, and there's just 3 areas here, but vision, dexterity and memory decreases, and in some cases quite significantly. And that might make longer tasks, more complex tasks harder, or certain things that we need to achieve. And if we were to accelerate forward now into the future where we would be elderly, we would find it harder just because of aging conditions to do the tasks that we do online today easier. Just like we might do driving, we'd find that harder as we age as well. And there's been some great research from the Nielsen Norman group, which has shown that 45% of the elderly are uncomfortable trying new things online. And when they fail, they generally blame themselves, whereas younger users will tend to persevere. And they'll also give up, which is another challenge for businesses, where young people will largely see it perhaps as being a bug or a shortcoming in the technology or the system. So I think it's worth, at this point, touching on how we learn and how we think. So there's crystallized and fluid thinking. When we're born, we have no crystallized thinking. Crystallized thinking is learnt experiences. And as we age, we use these experiences to inform everything that we do. And we use less and less fluid thinking. And fluid thinking is where we have to solve problems for the first time. And of course, when we're young, we're trying things for the new time. We make mistakes, we're prepared to fail, and we'll try again. And we start to build that crystallized thinking. But actually, when it comes to digital services, this is quite interesting. So with the crystallized users, well, ultimately, they want things to work in the way that they expect them to work. They want things to work in the way that they've experienced them previously. And they want those familiar patterns and those familiar conventions. And this is quite, actually, this is really true for certain people with certain conditions such as autism as well. And then with the fluid side, actually, people are willing to try new things. They're willing to work things out. They're willing to persevere if there are challenges. And one idea we have based around this, and we've got these fairly crude age groups, but actually, I think the message here is quite important, that innovation has its place. Now, for young people, they are, and they generally do, we see this all the time, they will embrace new ideas and new technology faster than anyone else. They're willing to invest in it, particularly at the bleeding edge, where perhaps it's imperfect, and they will try to make that work. Whereas older people are less likely to do that. Now, innovation can have a place with older people, but it has to be really compelling. If it isn't, it probably isn't going to work as well. It will certainly take longer for it to be successful. So we should touch on what this means for your organisation. And really, when it comes to businesses, there are 4 main benefits: financial, reputational, legal, and moral. Now, there's some great research done by Clickaway Pounds, which suggests that 71% of people who come across accessibility barriers will abandon a difficult website. Pretty significant number. And what's even more sobering is the estimated spending power of these users, which is 11.750 billion. And 82% of these customers are saying that actually, if their needs were better met, they would spend more on these digital services. So if we look at each of these 4 points briefly, on financial benefits, at least, and this is what the research is showing us, at least 10% of potential customers may be won or lost over the issues of really assisted digital meeting those needs. And if 10% of our audience is assisted digital, so to speak, then actually, if we're not well serving those needs, they're either going to use other channels that we offer, which are generally more expensive to serve, or they may go elsewhere. And there are legal benefits. We have to meet certain requirements under the Equalities Act that all services do not discriminate and they are available for everybody. And there's reputational benefits. And I think in 2020, with everything that's happened this year, this is probably more important than ever. Businesses that are making their services available to everybody, people that are having to bank online for the first time because banks are closed or they can't get through on the phone, or do online shopping for the first time because it's too high risk for them to go to the supermarket. Businesses that really support people through that really helps their brand, helps that brand value, which ultimately leads to greater loyalty to that organisation. And finally, there's the moral side of it. It's about doing the right thing. And as designers, as writers, as developers, it is within our power to make services inclusive. And of course, inclusivity benefits everybody, not just users that are assisted digital that need more help, because clarity and good design is just good design. It works for everyone. So inclusive design is so much more than designing for people with disabilities. And at Engine, when we look at a project, we make sure we look at a number of areas. We look at the web experience these users have. The connectivity is what is that like? Do they have a neurodiverse trait that we have to consider? What's their education level like? Now, in the UK, we have a rather shameful record where we have a very large number of the population, I think it's one of the largest in Europe, where basic English and math skills and also computer skills are way below the European average. And age is a challenge. As we've looked at, there's lots of things we need to consider that are age related. There are language barriers. Is language the first language? Is English the first language? And if it's not, what sort of conditions are we dealing with there? And then there's the cognitive condition, and by that I mean it could be high stress, it could be somebody going through a life event. These circumstances totally change the way we think and the way we can concentrate and the way we can absorb information. And if by understanding these things we can build services that are better suited to the journey these people are going on. It's important we understand the environment people are accessing the service. Are they sat at home in their own time on a PC at a desk, or are they on a mobile phone on a bus with lots of noise and lots of other things going on? And of course, a key part of this is disability. And the problem we have today is, as designers and developers, we generally sleepwalk into exclusion because as professionals, we think we know what needs to be done. And Microsoft have got some great quotes through work they have done in inclusive design. And exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases, is a big challenge. And I think there's a really good point here that when it comes to people, there is no such thing as normal. They might be thinking, well, look, if we're user-centered, that's going to solve this. Well, in theory, it does, but in reality, it isn't, because if it was, we wouldn't be here today giving this presentation. The thing is, you can't possibly design for what you don't know. And it's really important that we engage with all users, and those that need our help the most are generally really hard to find, because the way that recruiters work is they have databases of people and they contact these people digitally. Well, these people aren't in these digital networks, so we have to look at other means to find these users, and it's really important that we do work with them. So I just want to leave you with one final thought before we move on to the next presentation. And this is a really old quote. It's been around for as long as I've been working in digital, from Jakob Nielsen of the Nielsen Norman Group. And really what he's saying here is, if something is difficult to do online or on your service, people will leave. And that is still as true today as it was 20 years ago. I mean, yes, digital has progressed and moved forward, and things have got better, but there are still challenges. So if there's one thing that we do, and clearly there are many things we can do, but if there's one thing we do, it's really about being simple. We need to keep stripping things back. We need to question, does this need to be here? And then we need to test it and learn from that and cut it back some more. And by going through that process, we'll start to make services that are more accessible to more people. And of course, that is really key. Looking again back at our objective is to make sure that everyone who needs to use your service can use it. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleagues who are going to talk through the work they've done at HMCTS, where we've taken a lot of these skills and methods and used them to build services for people going through fairly major life events and who have quite extreme assisted digital needs. Thank you.
Julius, over to you.
Yeah, sorry. So next slide, please. And morning, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm always delighted to come along to these sorts of events and talk about the truly wonderful work that we've done in our tribunal. So just to start with a bit of background, the Immigration Asylum Chamber is part of the first tier tribunal, and it deals with appeals against Home Office decisions where someone has either been refused permission to enter the UK or to remain in the UK. And as you can see on the slide here, there are 5 rights of appeal. They are all related to fundamental rights. So, for example, protection, which is, I think, more commonly known as asylum. It's someone wanting to stay in the UK as a refugee because it's unsafe to return to their own country. And things like human rights, it's not just your right to life, but it's also, prohibition of torture or slavery. So some really serious things in there. And the tribunal's decisions have a huge impact on appellants, their families, their safety and their liberty. And as you'll see shortly, our appellants actually can be amongst the most vulnerable that we see in HMCTS, and sometimes they have multiple vulnerabilities. So can we have the next slide, please? So this is an example of an appellant that we would deal with. Now, some of these are common, and to a certain extent you would expect them given the nature of our tribunal. So a lack of English, for example, because appellants using our service aren't British. And they're also often isolated from their support networks, especially when they're trying to join family here in the UK. But we also sometimes see very serious factors. We can have appellants that have suffered torture, they've been forced into marriage, there's gender-based violence, persecution for sexual orientation, and so on and so forth. And because they can only appeal on these fundamental rights, the Home Office decision letters can actually be very complex and very long, and that will leave prospective appellants really very unsure of whether they have a meritorious appeal or not. And of course, over recent years, fewer people than previously can now obtain funding to help with legal advice through legal aid. And we know that unfortunately there are representatives out there who offer very poor service, and sometimes they deliberately exploit the most vulnerable appellants. They do things like charge court fees that are either inflated or just simply don't exist. And yet Pursuing an appeal on your own can present a number of difficulties, so you can see why people do turn to these sort of representatives. So we've already touched upon language and things like literacy, but answering questions in our forms, which are very long and have to be filled out in English, it can be a real challenge, especially when they've got to actually put some complex legal and factual issues into that form. So incomplete forms are frequently submitted to our tribunal actually, and it's very difficult, I think, for that appellant, because the way we then work when we accept that appeal form is the case is listed straight away for a hearing, which can be several months in advance, and then they aren't contacted in the meantime. So you can imagine through that time, appellants' anxiety can really increase. So you put all these things together, and these appellants have been very hard to reach, and historically been a group that we've been unable to engage with despite our best efforts in HMCTS. So individual needs are often not known, let alone accommodated for, and operating models and processes have tended to be of a universal design approach in the past. Next slide, please. So we have what is known as HMCTS reform. It's a programme, a £1 billion programme of work to reform all courts and tribunals in HMCTS, and it's being delivered in collaboration with senior judiciary. And some of the aims are simply to make the justice system simpler to access and to use. And whilst there's a lot of technology in there supporting improved processes and bringing them into the 21st century, it is not all about the technology. It really is an opportunity to look again at how your tribunal operates. And so that's what we did. Our tribunal was ripe for change. We've already touched upon some of the appellants' vulnerabilities, but actually the impact on the tribunal itself was it was heavily paper-based. We had high volumes of work, very lengthy timescales because we'd list a hearing for many months in advance. And then because nothing happened in the months leading up to that hearing, suddenly within the weeks and days beforehand, we'd get evidence coming in that meant we had to adjourn that hearing. And then the next hearing date was again several months in advance. So the overall hearing and sort of length of time to decision was actually really very, very long, with those very high adjournment rates. And we also knew that there's a high percentage of successful appeals. So Home Office decisions were often overturned. So we knew there was an opportunity to look again really at the ways of working for not just the tribunal, but all parties. And some of the things that we decided to address were not listing up front, and we introduced proactive case management to keep those cases progressing and moving along. And we also required the Home Office to review their decision in light of appellants' evidence. And crucially, we only now list the hearing when we know that the case is ready and it actually needs to go before a judge. The majority of our appellants are represented, actually, around 80% of them are, but at the heart of our design was the most vulnerable litigant in person and how we could accommodate their needs within our new process. And I'm going to hand over to Natalie Harney now to explain how we did that. Over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Julie. So yeah, I'm just going to talk you through some of the ways that we tried to keep inclusivity at the heart of our design process as we went about reforming the immigration and asylum appeals journey. So some of the things we're going to touch on, first of all, how we tried to establish a research community, really meet people where they were, how we took a storytelling approach to both our research and to our design, how we used co-design to try and build and increase understanding within both our participants and also our service more widely, and then also how we created long-term relationships and long-term ways of working that really supported that design to get off the ground. Next slide, please. So the first of those was all about how we created a research community. So as Dave previously mentioned, people with assisted digital needs can often be really hard to reach. So we took an approach by making and developing relationships with community organisations who are already working in the area, developing trust with people that are supporting appellants and already speaking to them day to day and who they already felt comfortable with, We met them in places where they were already meeting. I had dinner with groups of young people out in gardens and met groups of women who were just talking about their experiences anyway, and they very kindly invited us along. And by meeting them in those places where they felt comfortable, we were really able to learn from their lived experiences and some of the things that happened outside of our service. Whether that was hearing stories of our young people who were trying to find internet connections by using the Wi-Fi that was on top of shops and using that through their phones and trying to understand the best way we could make a service that they could access. Whether that was speaking to people that had been in detention and that had really changed their opinion of government and how we could build a service that not only appeared to be impartial, but really was impartial and offered them a listening ear. Or the lady that I met at Women for Refugee Women, who unfortunately slept on a bus through the beginning portion of her time in the UK. And that obviously meant that she couldn't carry around her essentials day to day. So how could she possibly carry around lots of paper evidence that she might have needed for a further appeal if she needed it? And all of those things made us think about how we could help people, not only with the service itself, but also how we could reduce the burden on using the service. So we weren't another problem in their lives, but something that just helped them along and made sure they got decisions as quickly and efficiently as possible. So they didn't feel like their lives were on hold, but they could keep moving forward. Next slide, please. And the way we're able to get that insight and that information from people wasn't about trying to ask the most pointed questions or going in with the hardest journalistic nose, but it was about trying to take a storytelling approach. By meeting people in places they were comfortable in, we felt that they were able to really tell us what they wanted to say and use trusted interpreters, have their friends there if something was particularly emotional. But we also tried as much as possible, and in every session, to let people tell us what they wanted to tell us before we started getting into any design questions. And that meant sitting and listening to people's stories, often for quite a long time, while they told us all the things that they wanted to tell us and they felt heard, whether that was telling us things about the Home Office, things about their hearing, things about how they were living during the process, so that they felt, okay, these people are here to listen to my story and to take my opinions and really support me through this process, rather than us being there to extract some information and then do something with it. And only once we'd listened to their stories and really understood them, did we then try and work together on what the future might look like and try and shape their insights into something that was kind of focused on those kind of neat columns that you can see at the bottom that would be useful for our design. Next slide, please. And throughout all of that research, we kind of realized quite quickly that we had a real range of digital, language and other capabilities in our appellant group. And that led us to a decision that we really wanted to be able to not only support those who really needed significant support, but to empower the people that had capabilities to do things on their own and really build on the skills and the strengths that they already had. So they felt that they were able to take ownership of their cases, which was so important to their lives. So we took an approach of building for those who had the lowest capability so that we could support those throughout the spectrum and really make sure we had something that was open, accessible and inclusive to all. But I'll let David talk you through some of our design work.
Thanks, Natalie. As Julie mentioned, our appellants are facing decisions that have a significant impact on their life. They're basically being told that they can't stay in this country. And with that in mind, they're often really living on the edge of society and are very weary speaking to anyone about anything, let alone to speaking to people who are representing a government agency. And so they're not found in the day-to-day communities of our design work. And so with these often untold stories in hand, we knew we had to build our design community's empathy with appellants and bring the appellants' backdrops, their social backdrops and their journeys to the fore. So through collaborative workshops like the one that you can see on the screen at the moment, we gave our stakeholders initially the role of researcher and equipped them with the methods to unpick rich visualizations of appellants' lives, identify critical needs with their own reflection and their own interpretation of these insights, understand some of the most significant experiential issues, and then together as a community build the imperatives for the future design. Next slide, please. So then, having tackled the role of researcher, we further equipped our stakeholders with the toolkit and methods of designers to iterate the ideas that Natalie said that we kind of started to move into at the end of our research sessions with appellants, and iterate these ideas and help us conjure up a future service with inclusion and accessibility right at the front of everybody's minds. Collaborative design has really been helpful in getting people to connect across organisational lines, build a deeper understanding in one another's worlds, and build a deeper understanding in one another's worlds with now these fresh insights and really critical stories in hand. The visual thinking through collaborative design, it draws focus away from wordy reports towards something much more visual, tangible, and enables quick and social ways of building ideas together. It's been so refreshing for some of the people that we've worked with that they have embraced these new ways of sort of design-led working and taken them away. And in one instance, a judge and some caseworkers in a local hearing centre used big boards, post-it notes, and design methods to think through with a local charity who approached them to understand how they could offer up support in their local hearing centre, which is otherwise really unheard of. But this sort of visual thinking, they could really unpack some of the risks and are now managed to figure out a way to support some of the most excluded members of the appellants community to have access on the day before their hearings. Next slide, please, Natalie.
Thanks. So I just wanted to finally touch on some of the ways that we tried to have long-term relationships with those research participants that we spoke about earlier. So where we've said we had a community of researchers and designers, we really do mean that we built a community. So we initially reached out to those support organisations and charities to see what we could learn by speaking to their supporters. They then kindly opened up their doors to us joining them in their spaces and speaking to the people that they helped because they had trust in what we were doing. And we wanted to really repay that trust by making them a full part of the process, whether that was engaging them with newsletters and further follow-ups on what we were doing, whether that was giving them the right to reply on any research that we did and sharing any findings. We had standing invitations to our show and tells and workshops to really make sure that if there was something that someone was interested in or had a really strong feeling about, that they could be part of the process of designing that element. But I think one of the really, well, for me, one of the most powerful things was going back to those appellants that we initially spoke to and allowing them to be the judge of whether or not we'd built something that would work. Taking back to them a service where they could see their ideas, the things that they told us in the form of a screen, which perhaps isn't the most exciting, like blow your mind thing, but to see them go, oh wait, you've really listened to what we said. And then for them to have the confidence to go, you've really listened to what we said and you've really listened to what I needed. And yes, I could answer this question, but could you do it in slightly different words? Or, oh, but could you put it in a slightly different order? I'd never think of doing it that way around. I'd always want to speak to someone else first. And having them be our final judges added so much value to the work that we've done, but also I think added a lot of value to the process for them in terms of giving them the confidence and making them feel they had been heard and that this was a service that was built not only for them, but with them. I'll hand back to you now, David.
Thanks. Next slide, please. So we've heard kind of how we connected with appellants, understood or tried to understand their stories, introduced them into the design process. And now I just want to quickly take you through some of our sort of final outputs from the design process. So in this first example, we've introduced a super short plain English appeal form. Appellants are faced with a 14-day window with which to appeal the Home Office decision. And in the past, they were asked to prepare their whole appeal argument in those 14 days and submit it, which was an incredible feat. So what we've done is dramatically reduce the ask on them right at the head, but also introduce that ask in very plain English, in fact, to the reading age of 5. So if we can go to the next slide, please, you'll just see how much we have simplified the form. So at the very left there is the old paper form that some people still have to use, and it had 128 technically worded fields. And then when we have redesigned the service for legal representatives, we've reduced it down to only 36 fields. And now for appellants without representation, we've reduced it down even further, just to 7 fields, and again in super plain English. Next slide, please. Then, having submitted their appeal form, they then have much more time to build that much richer set of insights and experiences that describe why the Home Office decision in their minds was wrong. But the version that we started with for legal representatives still required some quite technical language, which wasn't going to cut it for appellants in person. So next slide, please. Again, to that kind of principle of simplicity. So on the left, you can see what a legal representative is asked to compile an appeal skeleton argument. Just the name of the document itself is pretty jargonistic, but they're asked to provide the evidence they plan to rely on, grounds and issues of a case, new matters, legal authorities. These words, they meant nothing to me when I came into the project, and it took me a while to get my head around them, let alone someone who's facing significant turmoil in their lives. And with support from our lead judges and Julie and others, we've been able to come up with a design that is just a single question. So why do you think the Home Office decision is wrong? And with some very simple instructions to show them how to offer up supporting evidence if they need to. So next slide, please, and I'll hand over to Julie for the last example from our design output.
Thanks, David. So you can see from that visual that the second swim lane down is the Tribunal Caseworker, and how just really they're responsible for passing the baton, if you like, from one party to another. Now, Tribunal Caseworkers, or TCWs, they perform delegated functions under the supervision and leadership of the judges, and that role has been in the tribunal for a number of years now, but there was more sort of capability and capacity for them to take more on. So working with them and the judges, they now have more powers in our reform service, including a new role, which is to ask questions in light of how that earlier question has been answered. They can then ask following and clarifying questions to actually really truly understand someone's story. And that's something that used to be done by the judge on the day of the hearing itself. So really getting that information, getting that story out of them up front reduces the pressure on them. And actually, if we get the right information and it's then reviewed by the Home Office, who do agree that they got it wrong, then that appellant will not have to go to court at all. So this is a really, really important piece of the new process, with TCWs really at the heart of that. But they still work within the rules, they still remain impartial, and they uphold the independence of the tribunal, but they just do give that more personal approach that supports and enables that appellant, and it helps the tribunal generate that better understanding of the appellant's view. And really, through that empowerment and enablement, we are putting that appellant on an equal footing with someone who has less vulnerability or someone who can afford to pay for a legal rep. And from the next slide, please, you can see that there's 2 ways this can be done. For someone who is more digitally capable, we can ask clarifying questions online, and we may well get all that the tribunal needs from that process. But where it isn't working or where it isn't appropriate, then the TCW can actually arrange a face-to-face meeting. And it's not a hearing, it's an appointment, but it's similar in that an interpreter will be present and they will talk face-to-face about getting that relevant information out from that appellant. Next slide, please. And so when we look back on how far we've come, and we really have come an awful long way, and I can't thank the research and design team at Engine enough, really, because they really have worked incredibly hard helping us. You can see now, returning to Adele, how we are actually enabling her. So the language is very simple, reading age of 5 instead of that massive form that had to have everything in it. We signpost support that's available at every stage. The process is really clear. It tells them exactly what they need to do. And I think in the past, the approach was really to design a process to fit the majority of users. You could say it was the sort of getting the biggest bang for your buck, really. But I think in our tribunal now, we really do think of that silent or hidden minority as our primary users and start our design for them, because if they can use our service, then of course anyone can. And the project's really paved the way for us to think about them differently, and the richness of research and the contacts we now have and that co-design approach will all remain with us going forward and will always be our starting point. And we've got the project's not over yet, it finishes next year. We've got 2 areas of our tribunal that are not yet reformed, and we'll be bringing those our knowledge and our approach to look at things like an appeal where someone is in detention, and also how we process immigration bail applications, which is a totally separate service, but again where someone is detained. And we will start on both of those journeys looking at it that person, that detainee, has no representation, and design it for them, and then expand it out for use by everyone, including legally represented applicants and appellants. That was it from me. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it really useful and interesting. And I love that picture of me.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. That was fascinating, and thanks very much, David and Natalie as well on that, and DJ before. So we've got about 10-12 minutes left, and it would be great to have any questions that you might have and be able to answer some of those. I know we've got some that have come in already. First up was a question about whether the slides are going to be shared after the presentation. They will be, as you know, it's also being recorded, so the recording will also be made available to you as well. And we've also had a second question, which would be, which I think, Dave, if you might want to pick this up, which came in during your part of the presentation around the population and where the stats and the data comes from. Was it UK only?
Yeah, all that data is UK only. It's all through various desk research that's led to that. Various associations for a lot of the traits that we showed you. So yeah, it's all UK data. Adults primarily in that data. So something like ADHD, for example, you'll generally find more people are recognised having that when they're younger. But when you're older, it might be less seen because the way the brain works is different. It's activated at the front, so it's one of those things which is harder to spot. But yeah, all UK data.
Great, thanks, Dave. And then we've had another question about recruiting harder to reach communities or people from the harder to reach community backgrounds. Natalie, I wonder if you could talk us through the work that you did and how you went about that process of thinking about how you were going to get to some of the people you needed to research with.
Of course. So we initially tried to recruit through traditional recruitment organisations, We asked them, is there any way you could help us find people appealing immigration decisions or people who've received immigration decisions? Unfortunately, they weren't able to help. As I think Dave mentioned earlier, the ways that they go about recruiting are often online, and they just felt, you know what, there's no way we're going to be able to recruit such a niche segment of people or people with the kinds of needs that you're looking for. So instead, we kind of flipped it on its head, and instead of trying to bring people to us, we tried to find a way to get out to where those people already were. So we reached out to charities who are already supporting refugees and migrants. We reached out to universities and other places where we knew there'd be high populations of people moving about and might have support networks there who would be able to lead us in the right direction. I also put ads and invitations out on online forums where people discuss and try and get help from their peer groups, and in the hearing centres themselves in more passive ways rather than trying to kind of, I have a better word for it, but pounce on people when they're very vulnerable. That didn't feel appropriate, but we left posters up in some of the places where people were getting support to say, if you've got any feedback on the way that things are going, we'd love to hear, please do get in touch. And we found the most kind of fruitful relationships we had were with those community organisations and charities where people were already helping and we could build up a long-term relationship. We did have some great luck with the people who had dropped into centres and seen the post and gone, oh wait, this hasn't been going great. I'd love to tell someone about what's been happening and see what we can do. I think those are some of the ways that we went about reaching those harder to reach people. I think the primary thing you have to think about is trying to meet people where they already are, rather than trying to bring them into you in lab settings where they might not feel comfortable.
Thanks, Natalie. Got a couple of questions that have come in related to a similar topic, which is principles and the communication around working with employees and how we take inclusive design into think about the employee side of our work. Dave, you've probably had quite a lot of experience with this with some of the projects we've done at VOA and other government departments as well. Wonder if you can talk a bit about that.
So are we asking in terms of making people aware of inclusive design and assisted digital needs, or dealing with people that have assisted digital needs internally when we're designing services?
So my reading of it is both, actually. So how do we both communicate the need to think about inclusive design to employees, but also how do we think about designing services for employees which are inclusive?
Yeah, okay, fine. Let's pick that one up first then. So it's always great to work closely with those people. I think co-creation is really, really valuable when we have those people effectively available to us because they are working within the organisation. And we often have the opportunity to work more closely with them than we might do with external users. So I think it's really important we bring them in early, and that's always key. With all of these things, we understand that challenge up front. Trying to retrospectively fix things in later stages is generally not a good idea. It's definitely more time consuming and more costly, and certainly not when we're live. So I think working closely with them, the team needs to really go hunting for that and really need to think about their needs as well. And it does create challenges because it complicates things. It makes things harder for designers and developers and writers, but actually we just have to deal with that head on. It's part of our job. So that's that part. And then if we're looking at increasing awareness of it, I think it's just really important that we recognise the size of this challenge. It's not small and not fringe groups, which I think most people probably think it is. When we look at this data and the stats, it's actually huge. And then if we get the chance to experience these conditions, which it's very hard to do, and there is software simulations as I showed you today, and there are more, but they're always quite extreme. But they do give you an idea for what it might be like if you've got an ADHD brain or a dyslexic brain, and those sorts of things. And I think it's really useful to go through exercises to understand that, just so you can start to put yourself in the shoes of those people. And of course, it's about everything we've said about recruiting and working with those users, because ultimately they're the ones which we need to be making use of the services that we have.
Thanks, Dave. Another question that's come in, David, I think this probably a good one for you, David, which is, with limited time and resources in mind, is there any top tip that HMCTS can suggest to make a start on co-design and what, for instance, what proved to be the most valuable aspect of the thorough research.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. And yeah, Julie, like rather like apt timing. I think one of the things has been from the very start of our work was kind of talking to Julie and talking to her colleagues who are kind of helping us build momentum behind the project and really describe and find support in the way that we wanted to work. So co-design, we made it our default, and we were able to do that because we had the permission of the likes of Julie and colleagues. And I think it was from that point, it was just the next natural step was to invite our wider colleagues into our workspace as much as possible. So but just in our day-to-day work, let alone working workshops, it was a natural way of working. And then I think building awareness beyond our immediate stakeholders and partners to say, this is the way that we work, and would you like to be a part of it? And so I think that has been kind of the on-ramp to co-design. I don't know, Julie, if there's anything from you in terms of
yeah,
what
I was going to totally echo that. It's we've been working with people and doing with them, not doing to them. And everybody has been welcomed, from an admin officer up to a judge, because they're the ones that actually know what the issues are. I've worked in the jurisdiction a long time, and I think I would know what all the problems and the pain points were. But actually, I think to me that was the biggest thing I learned from research, is that they're not what you think they are. And the smallest thing can actually make the hugest difference. And getting the right people along from the beginning and having them stay with you along that journey. And we had people in our workshops that you would have thought would be adversarial in the past. We had the Home Office, presenting officers there, and a legal rep there, but everyone's working for the same aim. So get them on board, keep them with you, and retain them on that journey. And yeah, it's been really, really good.
Thanks, Julie. And I think one of those things that kind of supported those adversaries to kind of stay with us and others to stay with us was bringing insights and the sort of story-led approach that Natalie has described. Those stories which people have never heard before, and people knew that when they came to a co-design session, they would be working through some stuff and working with people that they didn't ordinarily get to meet day to day and think about day to day. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, both. We've got just a couple of minutes left, so I'll just see if there are any more questions that immediately come in. But I think nothing that's immediately there. So with just a couple of minutes to go, I think I just want to take a moment to say thank you to everyone who has joined today. It's been great to be able to share some of this work and some of the approaches that we talked about today with you, and hope that you found it interesting. We're going to be sending out some follow-ups off the back of this, which will come to everyone who accepted the invite and who's attended today. So hope do look out for that in your inboxes, and we'll share more information and details on LinkedIn. Plus, I say there will be the recording from today's session that you'll be very welcome to relook at. And if you do want to get back in touch with us, then please do. But for now, I'll say thanks again. Thanks for joining us, and have a very good day. Thanks very much.